Throughout this presentation, we will be referring to the word cleft in regard to the diagnosis of cleft lip and palate. This term is defined as a split or divide. Therefore, a cleft lip and palate is an abnormal gap that may be present in the palate of the roof of the child's mouth or in the lip of the child. Cleft lip and palate is a birth condition caused by the mouth structures failing to join together during early pregnancy. Throughout fetal development, the lip and the palate develop separately. During the first month of pregnancy, the baby's mouth develops into two halves, and by the 8th week, the two halves are fused together to create the hard palate of the roof of the baby's mouth. The lips of a baby develop around the 10th week of pregnancy, and simultaneously the nose has begun to take its structure and location. This difference in timing for the baby's facial structure's development means that it is possible for the baby to be born with a cleft lip and/or palate in a variety of ways. This can be present in the baby with only a cleft of the lip, only a cleft palate, or a combination of a cleft lip and palate. If a baby is born with a cleft of the lip, they may have a complete cleft of the lip, where there is a split or opening extending from the lip all the way up to the nostril, or there may be a band of tissue below the nostril leaving a part of the lip joined, which is referred to as an incomplete cleft. If a baby is born with a cleft of the palate, it may be isolated to only the soft palate of the mouth or only the hard palate, or the cleft could also extend the full length of both the hard and soft palate. Clefts can also occur on only one side of the baby's midline, which is called a unilateral cleft, or the cleft may affect both sides, which is referred to as a bilateral cleft. A cleft lip and palate can cause a lot of implications on the baby's development. This can include the baby's feeding regime. Babies rely on either a nipple or a teat of a bottle to receive milk to gain the nutrition they need to grow. However, making a connection to the feeding source and creating suction is difficult if a baby has a cleft of the lip, as the gap extending to the nostril allows extra air to enter the space, making it difficult for the baby to draw milk out. Likewise, the baby uses its tongue to push the nipple or teat against the roof of the mouth to assist the suction of the milk, which is proven difficult if the baby has a cleft in the palate. Usually, if a baby has a cleft lip and/or palate, they are fed through a bottle, and a maternal health nurse will instruct the mother on how to optimize their feeding regime with the baby. Another factor that affects babies with a cleft lip and/or palate is speech development. If a child is born with only a cleft of the lip, they may obtain fairly normal speech, but may need assistance in creating sounds that require bilabial lip closure. Baby's cleft lip and palate is developed in utero and can be detected by an ultrasound or noticed at birth. In baby boys, cleft lip alone and cleft lip and palate together is more common, whilst in baby girls, cleft palate by itself is more common. Factors that may increase the likelihood of a baby developing cleft lip and palate include if there is a family history of cleft lip and palate, this means it could be genetic. If the pregnant woman smokes, drinks alcohol, or takes certain medications. It also depends on the race of the child. For example, cleft lip and palate is more common in Native Americans than it is in African Americans. And environmental factors and geographical areas also play a part in the likelihood of the fetus developing cleft lip and palate. According to the World Health Organization, the craniofacial anomaly cleft lip and/or palate occurs in approximately 1 per 500 to 700 births, with this ratio varying substantially throughout geographical areas and ethnic groups. They also estimated that 30% of cleft lip and/or palate are syndromic, which is symptoms that are characteristic of their disorder or disease, and the other 70% are non-syndromic. Cleft lip with and without cleft palate has the highest prevalence rate in Bolivia, with 2.28 per 10,000 births, with the Mongolian population in Tibet being almost as prevalent. Cleft palate has the highest prevalence in Finland, with 10 to 14 births per 10,000, with Scotland being second with a prevalence of 8 per 10,000. The highest prevalence is found in those with a Mongolian ethnicity, as proved above with Bolivia and Tibet, both with Mongolian ethnicity. The lowest is found in Africans with Caucasians having an intermediate prevalence level. Therefore, countries such as Japan, the Philippines, American Indians of British Columbia, and the Mestizo population in Latin American countries such as Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile all fit into the Mongolian ethnicity category and thus have a high prevalence level. On the low side of the spectrum, countries such as those in Africa and Latin American countries with a high African ancestral background, such as Venezuela and Santo Domingo, have a far lower prevalence of cleft lip and/or palate. For Europe, higher prevalence is found in the northern countries, with a lower prevalence in the southern countries. While cleft lip is more prevalent in males, stillborn babies with cleft lip are predominantly female, showing that there are anomalies related to cleft lip that are either only present in females or are more severe in females. There are two children that have had significant differences in dealing with their cleft lip and palate. One child's name is Marceline, and she is from a village in Rwanda. The other is Brandon, living in Ohio, USA. Marceline, being one of the only children in her village with a cleft lip, she was quickly discriminated and labelled ugly. She would often be bullied, so much so that she decided the best way to walk around was to cover the bottom half of her face so that she would not be stared at, picked on, or laughed at. In extreme cases, she would be hit and told that she was making them sick to their stomachs. She is not allowed to eat or drink with other children as they fear that she will contaminate them. As a result of this negative social stigma, she stopped attending school and instead helped her mother with the chores. As a younger child, like any other child born with a cleft lip and palate, she has had trouble feeding and getting the nutrients she needed to function properly as a child. Her mother did not know how to give her water and feared that she would die of thirst. She struggled with producing her speech, and that made her shyer in school, and she would not raise her hand even if she knew the answer to the question. At 11 years of age, she founded an organization called Operation Smile. They used money from their friends at church and travelled very far to reach the hospital. Her surgery was finished in an hour and she had a brand new smile. At that time, only 2 Rwandan surgeons knew how to repair a cleft lip and palate out of 10 million citizens. On the other hand, Brandon was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. He was tended to immediately and his first surgery was at 3 months of age. He had 3 surgeries to repair his lip and palate, all before his first birthday. In terms of feeding, they used a bottle called a special needs feeder that was representative of a nipple, however he did not need to suck as hard as the milk could be pushed into his mouth. As soon as Brandon was born, a medical team supported him and his parents that consisted of nurses, surgeons, speech therapists, and more. Brandon has been seeing a speech therapist since he was 3 years old, so he could feel comfortable speaking when he started learning at school. There are many factors that affect the lived experiences of Brandon and Marceline. The main one being that Brandon was born and raised in the USA, where the incidence of cleft lip and palate is somewhat higher and medical staff are well trained in the surgery needed to repair it. Most kids born with this condition in the USA can have reconstructive surgery within the first 12 to 18 months of life. Whereas Marceline was born in a village in Rwanda where only 2 surgeons in the whole country were able to repair cleft lips and palates. This factor has a significant impact on the lived experiences of each of these children, as one was given the opportunity to have surgery from a young age as the necessary resources were made available to them. And contrary to this, one was born into a country that lacked the medical staff and resources needed for surgery. Another factor that leads on from this is that because Brandon was able to have his first surgery at 3 months old and continued to have his follow-up surgeries at the appropriate times, he was able to have a relatively normal-looking nose and mouth by the age of 16 months. This means that by the time he attended kindergarten and primary school, his facial appearance did not look distinctly different from the other children, and he therefore did not get bullied or experience a great amount of stigma. Marceline, however, was unfortunately not given the same opportunities as previously discussed, and therefore experienced a huge amount of discrimination and stigma due to this. This factor explains how both Brandon and Marceline had differing lived experiences as they grew up. Due to the fact that Brandon was able to have surgery when he was very young, and he had a relatively normal facial appearance, he was able to go to school and establish friendship with other children, therefore having a positive impact on his social health. Contrary to this, Marceline had difficulty growing up with her cleft lip and palate, and as she didn't have the surgery at a young age, her facial appearance was different to others. She would go to other people's houses and they would tell her to leave, and she would feel sad and angry. This discrimination and constant bullying caused her to stop going to school and instead help her mother with the chores. This is another factor that has contributed to Brandon and Marceline having different lived experiences of the communication disorder, cleft lip and palate.